He was a billionaire who lived by logic. She was a night shift janitor living in a nightmare. When Sarah Vance missed work for 3 days, Julian Thorne didn't call HR. He drove to the slums. He kicked down her door and found her cowering from an abuser. He didn't just save her life. He destroyed her attacker in court and gave her the keys to a new future. But what started as a rescue mission became a love story that shocked the world. Because the man who built a fortress of glass realized he was the one trapped in a cage, and the janitor he saved was the only one who held the key. Before we start story, please subscribe our channel to watch more interesting stories. Julian Thorne, the billionaire architect of V-Nexus Technologies, lived a life defined by logic, cold glass, and the absolute predictability of high-frequency trading. He was a man who believed that every problem had a mathematical solution. However, a small, nagging anomaly had been bothering him for 3 days: the unexplained absence of Sarah Vance. Sarah was a night shift custodial lead with a flawless record spanning 4 years. In a company of 10,000, she should have been a ghost on a payroll sheet. But Julian had grown up in the crushing silence of a house where people disappeared without warning. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Driven by an impulse he couldn't name, Julian bypassed the security detail and obtained her address from the HR database. He drove his sleek sedan into the industrial fringe of the city, a place where the streetlights were shattered and the air smelled of damp concrete and desperation. He found the apartment building, a crumbling tenement that looked like it was being held together by rust and grime. As he climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, the muffled sounds of man's drunken roar and the sickening, rhythmic thud of something hitting a wall echoed to the narrow hallway. Julian reached apartment 4, just as a woman's muffled scream cut through the air. He didn't knock. He put his shoulder to the door with a desperate strength, and the frame splintered open. The scene inside was a nightmare. The living room smelled of cheap whiskey and stale cigarettes. Rick Vance, a towering man with bloodshot eyes, had Sarah pinned against a radiator. His hand was raised for another strike, while Sarah, her face already blooming with dark purple bruises and a split lip, was cowering, trying to shield her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who was sobbing in the corner. Julian's vision went red. He didn't think about his status or the potential scandal. He acted. He lunged forward, tackling Rick away from Sarah. Julian was a man who spent his stress in a boxing ring, and his movements were clinical. He ducked a clumsy swing from a whiskey bottle, caught Rick's arm, and used the man's own momentum to slam him face first into the floor. He pinned him down with a knee to the spine, holding him with a grip of iron. "Sarah, grab Lily and get out of this room," Julian commanded, his voice trembling with a rage he had never felt in a boardroom. He pulled his phone out and dialed 911. "I need police and an ambulance at 1242 Miller Street. I have a domestic assault in progress, and the perpetrator is detained. Send them now." As the sirens wailed in the distance, Julian looked at Sarah. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. She was clutching her ribs, her breathing shallow and pained. He saw the look of deep, crushing shame in her eyes, the look of a woman who had been living in a private hell while keeping the floors of a $1-million empire spotless. When the police arrived, Julian gave a cold, detailed statement. He watched with grim satisfaction as they hauled the cursing, stumbling Rick Vance away in handcuffs. He then turned to the paramedics. "Take her to the private wing at St. Jude's. Put every single cent on my personal account. She is under my protection now." As the ambulance pulled away, Julian realized that his world of logic and data had just been shattered by the raw, brutal reality of a life he could no longer ignore. The transition from the trauma of the apartment to the sterile safety of the hospital was swift, but the emotional recovery was just beginning. Julian Thorne was not a man who did things halfway. By the time Sarah was stabilized in her private room, Julian had already mobilized a legal army that would have intimidated a Fortune 500 company. He sat in the hospital cafeteria with Marcus Reed, the company's most formidable litigator, a man known for a scorched earth policy in the courtroom. "I'll want the best divorce attorney in the state on retainer for Sarah Vance by noon," Julian stated, his voice as cold as ice. "And I want Rick Vance buried. I want every police report from the last 5 years, every medical record, and every neighbor's testimony. I want him to spend the rest of his life wondering why he ever touched her. He stays in jail until the divorce is finalized, and I want a permanent restraining order that covers every inch of the state." Marcus nodded, his pen scratching against his notepad. "Julian, this is a massive use of resources for a custodial employee. Are you sure you want to go this far?" Julian leaned over the table, his eyes burning. "She isn't a custodial employee anymore. She is a human being who was nearly murdered while she worked for me. If we don't protect our own, then Thorne Tower is just a fancy pile of glass. Do it." While the legal machinery began to grind Rick Vance into dirt, Julian visited Sarah. The swelling on her face had begun to subside, but the psychological wounds were evident. She flinched when the nurse opened the door too quickly. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, coloring quietly, her small hand constantly reaching out to touch her mother's arm, a silent check to ensure Sarah was still alive. "The papers are being filed today," Julian said softly, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "Rick has been denied bail due to the severity of the assault and the prior history our investigators uncovered. He won't be coming near you again. Marcus is handling the divorce, the custody, and the protection of your assets." Sarah looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I've wanted to leave for 10 years, Julian, but he told me I was nothing. He told me that if I left, I'd be on the street, and the state would take Lily away because I was just a janitor. He made me believe I was invisible to the rest of the world." "You were never invisible," Julian replied, his voice earnest. "And your life as a janitor is over. I'm appointing you as a director of our new Employee Advocacy and Safety Department. You know exactly what the vulnerable members of our staff are hiding. You know the signs of abuse and the silence of the desperate. You're going to help me build a company that acts as a sanctuary for its people. We will provide the training, but you provide the soul." Sarah looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a boss or a billionaire, but as a man who had seen her at her lowest and decided she was worth fighting for. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to lead anything, Julian. My hands are still shaking." "Strength isn't the absence of fear, Sarah. It's moving forward while you're shaking," Julian said, reaching out to give her hand a supportive squeeze. "We're going to rebuild your life together, one brick at a time." Well, weeks later, the divorce was fast-tracked through the courts thanks to the overwhelming evidence of abuse Julian's team had gathered. Sarah was officially free. Julian had arranged for a high-security, luxury apartment for Sarah and Lily, located in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood near a top-tier school. On moving day, Julian didn't send a moving crew. He showed up himself in a pair of jeans and a T-shirt, ready to carry boxes. He brought his Aunt Martha with him, the woman who had raised him after his own mother had succumbed to the toll of an abusive life. Martha was a retired schoolteacher with a heart like a furnace and eyes that missed nothing. The moment she met Sarah, she pulled her into a hug that smelled of lavender and peppermint. "My Julian told me you were a fighter, dear. We're going to get you settled in, and then I'm going to teach you how to make the best pot roast in the Pacific Northwest." While Martha and Sarah organized the kitchen, Julian worked with Lily in her new bedroom. It was a sun-drenched space with a view of the park. Julian helped her assemble a white wooden bookshelf and set up a brand-new art desk. He watched as Lily carefully placed her sketches, previously hidden in shoe boxes, onto the desk. "This is your space now, Lily. No one is ever going to break your things or make you hide again." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Is my dad really gone?" "He's gone," Julian promised, "and he's never coming back. You have a new family now. Me, your mom, and Aunt Martha." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Julian and Sarah stood on the small balcony of the apartment. For the first time, Sarah didn't look like she was bracing for an impact. She looked at peace. "The divorce decree came in the mail today," she said quietly. "It feels strange to have my name back, to feel like I own my own skin again. It's a new chapter, Sarah," Julian said, leaning against the railing. "And you're doing incredible work at the office. The Safe Haven program you designed for night shift is already helping 3 other women who are in similar situations. You're saving lives, Sarah." "I'm just returning the favor," she replied, looking at him with a gaze that made Julian's heart skip a beat. "You gave me the keys to my own life, Julian. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." "I don't want thanks," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "I just want to see you happy. I want to see you become the woman you were meant to be before the world tried to break you." They stood in silence for a long time, watching the city lights flicker on. Julian realized that his high-rise office and his billions meant nothing compared to the quiet victory of this moment. He had spent his life building a tech empire, but he was finally realizing that the most important thing a man could build was a bridge for someone else to cross out of the darkness. He felt a profound sense of protective love for Sarah and Lily, a feeling that was rapidly evolving into something he hadn't planned for, but was no longer willing to resist. As the months passed, the Thorne advocacy program became a national sensation, but within the walls of Thorne Tower, a more personal transformation was taking place. Sarah Vance was no longer the woman who scrubbed the floors. She was a confident, sharp-witted executive who commanded respect. She had started night classes for her degree in social work, and Julian found himself inventing reasons to stop by her office every day. What had begun as a rescue mission had evolved into a deep, soul-stirring friendship. They began a tradition of Tuesday debriefs, which quickly moved from the office to a small, quiet Italian bistro near Sarah's apartment. Over glasses of red wine and plates of pasta, the boundaries between CEO and employee blurred into nothingness. Julian found himself sharing things he had never told anyone: the loneliness of his childhood, the fear that he was only valued for his bank account, and the constant pressure to be Julian Thorne, the visionary. "Everyone sees a tower," Julian confessed one night, swirling the wine in his glass. "But sometimes I feel like I'm still that 10-year-old kid hiding in the closet while my father screamed at my mother. I built all of this so no one could ever hurt me again, but all I did was build a very expensive cage." Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and grounding. "We both built cages, Julian. Mine was made of fear and silence, and yours was made of glass and gold. But we're out now. You pulled me out, and in the process, I think you pulled yourself out too." Sarah shared her own progress, how she no longer checked the locks 5 times before bed, and how Lily had started singing in the school choir. She spoke of the joy of finally being able to breathe without waiting for the next disaster. Julian listened with an intensity that made Sarah feel seen in a way she never had before. He didn't just look at her, he saw her. He saw her strength, her resilience, and the quiet beauty that shone through her eyes. However, the world outside was not as kind. Marcus Reed pulled Julian aside one afternoon. "Julian, the press is starting to sniff around. There are rumors about your special interest in Sarah. Silas Vane and some of the other investors are whispering that you've lost your focus. They see Sarah as a liability, a former janitor with a messy past." Julian's face hardened. Let them whisper. Sarah Vance has more integrity in her pinky finger than Silas Vane has in his entire body. She is the best thing that ever happened to this company, and she is certainly the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm just warning you, Julian. They'll try to use her to get to you. "Let them try," Julian replied, his voice low and dangerous. "I broke down a door to save her once. I have no problem breaking down a few boardrooms to keep her safe now." That evening, Julian walked Sarah to her door. The air was crisp, and the tension between them was palpable. Julian wanted to tell her how he felt, that his heart raced every time she laughed, and that he admired her more than any person he had ever met. But he held back, still protective of her healing process. He didn't want to be another man demanding something from her. He wanted to be the man who gave her everything. He kissed her cheek, a lingering, soft gesture, and promised to see her tomorrow. As he walked away, he knew the bridge of friendship was nearing its end, and a much more beautiful path was opening up. The turning point came during the annual V-Nexus Charity Gala. It was the most prestigious event of the year, filled with the city's elite and a swarm of hungry journalists. Julian had asked Sarah to be his guest, not as an employee, but as his partner. Sarah had hesitated, terrified of the judgment she knew was coming. But Julian had looked her in the eyes and said, "I want the world to see the woman I see. You belong there more than any of them." Sarah arrived in a gown of deep emerald green, her hair pinned back to reveal her radiant face. She looked like a queen, yet her hands were trembling as she stepped out of the car. Julian was there to meet her, his hand immediately finding the small of her back. Throughout the night, Silas Vane and his cohorts watched from the shadows, their eyes filled with malice. They made loud comments about charity cases and upward mobility. But Julian ignored them, his focus entirely on Sarah. The gala featured an art auction, and the final piece was a surprise entry. It was a large, vibrant canvas by Lily. She had painted a lighthouse standing firm against a violent storm, its light cutting through the darkness to reach a small, battered boat. The title was The Anchor, when it sold for a record-breaking amount to an anonymous bidder, who everyone knew was Julian. Sarah had to slip away to the balcony to catch her breath, overwhelmed by the symbolism. Julian found her there, looking out at the city. "Are you okay?" "It's just a lot," Sarah said, wiping a tear. 6 months ago, I was hiding in a bathroom stall crying because I didn't have enough money for Lily's lunch. Now I'm here. It feels like a dream I'm going to wake up from." Julian stepped closer, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of his suit. "This isn't a dream, Sarah. This is the life you were always supposed to have. And I want to be the one to share it with you. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be just a friend. But I can't do it anymore. I love you, Sarah. I love your strength. I love your heart. And I love the way you've changed me. I want us to be a real family. I want to marry you." Sarah's breath hitched. "Julian, you could have anyone. You're a billionaire, a visionary. I'm just—" "You're the woman who saved me from becoming a machine," Julian interrupted, taking both of her hands. "You're the woman I want to wake up to every morning. Don't tell me what I could have. Tell me if you want what I'm offering." Sarah looked at him, at the man who had broken down a door to save her, the man who had sat by her hospital bed, the man who had built a desk for her daughter. "Yes," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, Julian, I love you so much it scares me." He kissed her then, a deep, certain kiss that sealed their fate. 2 weeks later, the board of directors tried to stage a coup led by Silas Vane, citing Julian's unstable personal life. Julian walked into that meeting, not with a lawyer, but with Sarah. He announced their engagement and his plan to adopt Lily. He told the board that if they had a problem with his family, they could buy out his shares at a premium and he would leave. The board, realizing Julian was a true engine of the company, backed down. Julian and Sarah were married in a quiet, sun-drenched ceremony a month later. The janitor and the CEO had finally found their home in each other. 5 years had passed since the night Julian broke down the door to apartment 4B. The world had changed for the Thorne family. Julian and Sarah were now the city's most beloved power couple, known for their radical philanthropy and their unwavering devotion to one another. Julian had officially adopted Lily, who now went by Lily Thorne, and the young girl had blossomed into a confident, talented teenager who excelled in both art and academics. Sarah had completed her degree and was now the Chief Impact Officer at V-Nexus, transforming the company into a global leader in corporate social responsibility. However, peace is often a target for those who thrive on chaos. Silas Vane had never forgotten his humiliation at the hands of Julian and Sarah. He had spent years quietly buying up shares through shell companies, waiting for a moment of weakness. He began a vicious smear campaign in the tabloids, digging up Sarah's past and twisting the story of her rescue. He framed it as Julian using his power to groom a vulnerable employee, turning their beautiful love story into a sordid tale of exploitation. The attacks were brutal. Sarah found herself followed by paparazzi who shouted questions about Rick Vance and her life as a janitor. Lily was bullied at school by kids who had seen the sensationalist headlines. The stress began to take a toll on the family. Julian was furious, his protective instincts flaring back to life, but Sarah was the one who held them together. "He wants us to hide, Julian," Sarah said one night as they sat in their living room, the fire crackling in the hearth. "He wants me to feel ashamed of where I came from. But I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not afraid of the light." "I'll destroy him, Sarah," Julian vowed, his eyes dark. "I'll pull every favor. I'll bankrupt his funds. No one hurts my family." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We won't fight him in the mud. We'll fight him with the truth." Sarah organized a televised town hall for all V-Nexus employees and the public. She stood on stage, radiant and poised, and told her story in her own words. She spoke of the abuse, the fear, and the janitorial shifts. She spoke of the night Julian saved her, and how they had built a life based on mutual respect. She turned Sarah Vance's scandal into a platform for domestic violence awareness, and the public's response was overwhelming. Sarah Vance's smear campaign backfired spectacularly, and he was forced into a shameful retreat as his own investors fled from the controversy. But as the external battle was won, an internal one was beginning. During the height of the stress, Julian had begun to experience unexplained bruising and bouts of extreme exhaustion. He dismissed it as a toll of the fight against Vane, but Sarah, with her sharp eyes, noticed that he was becoming paler by the day. During a celebratory dinner after the town hall, Julian collapsed. Sarah caught him before he hit the floor, her heart racing with a familiar, cold dread. As the ambulance arrived, this time for Julian, Sarah realized that their life of milestones was about to face its most terrifying test yet. The man who had been the anchor for everyone else was now the one who was drifting into the dark. The diagnosis was a hammer blow that shattered the peace Julian and Sarah had fought so hard to build. Acute myeloid leukemia. It was aggressive, and the doctors were blunt. Julian's chances were 50-50 at best. The man who had built a literal and metaphorical fortress for his family was now trapped in a body that was betraying him. The roles were suddenly, violently reversed. Sarah, the woman Julian had rescued from a kitchen floor, was now the one who had to be the warrior. The next 12 months were a descent into a sterile, painful hell. Julian underwent 3 rounds of grueling chemotherapy that stripped him of his hair, his weight, and his legendary energy. There were nights in the hospital when his fever spiked so high that he didn't recognize Sarah or Lily. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind often returning to the dark hallways of his childhood. Through it all, Sarah never left his side. She turned his hospital room into a command center, coordinating with the best oncologists in the world while simultaneously managing the company. "You need to rest, Sarah," Julian whispered one night during a brief moment of clarity. He looked frail, his skin almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights. "You've spent enough of your life taking care of people who are breaking. Go home to Lily." Sarah leaned down and kissed his hand, her eyes fierce. "I am home, Julian. Wherever you are is home. You broke down a door for me once. I'm breaking down heaven and earth for you now. Don't you dare give up on me." Lily became their secret weapon. She spent every afternoon in the hospital, her sketchbooks filled with drawings of her father. She drew him as a knight, as a mountain, as a star. She refused to let the gloom of the oncology war dim her spirit. "The doctors say your blood is tired, Dad," she told him, holding his hand. "So I'm going to be your extra blood. I'm going to be strong enough for both of us." The low point came when Julian developed a secondary infection. For 72 hours, his life hung by a thread. The doctor suggested Sarah start making arrangements. Sarah refused. She gathered the V-Nexus employees in a massive virtual vigil. Thousands of people who had been helped by the Thorne Advocacy Program shared their stories of how Julian's vision had saved them. Sarah played the recording for Julian while he was unconscious, the voices of thousands of people he had helped acting as a chorus of hope. On the fourth day, the fever broke. A week later, Dr. Ayres walked into the room with a look of disbelief on his face. "The bone marrow biopsy is back, Julian. You're in remission. The cancer is gone." The celebration was not a loud one. It was a profound, tearful silence. Julian, Sarah, and Lily held each other in the center of the hospital room, a circle of three that had survived the storm. Julian looked at Sarah, the woman he had once saved from a drunken monster, and realized that she had become the most powerful person he had ever known. He had given her a new life, but she had given him back his own. The final battle was won, not with billions of dollars, but with the quiet, indestructible power of a love that refused to die. 10 years had passed since the night the world changed in apartment 4B. Thorne Tower still stood tall against the Seattle skyline, but it was no longer just a corporate headquarters. It had become a symbol of a new kind of capitalism. To celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Thorne Advocacy Program, a massive event was held in the building's grand atrium. Thousands of people attended. Employees, former victims of domestic violence who had found a second chance, and the many children who had been granted scholarships through the Thorne Foundation. Julian Thorne stood at the podium. He was older now, with streaks of silver in his hair and a slight limp from the toll the leukemia had taken on his body, but his presence was more commanding than ever. He didn't look like a man who owned the world. He looked like a man who had finally understood his place in it. Beside him stood Sarah, the chief executive officer of the Thorne Foundation, and Lily, a brilliant young artist whose work was already being featured in major galleries. 10 years ago, Julian began, his voice echoing through glass and steel, I thought my legacy would be a line of code or a stock price. I thought that power was something you exercised from the top down, but I was a blind man. I didn't understand that true power is found in the moment you decide that another person's pain is your own. I didn't save Sarah Vance 10 years ago. She saved me. She showed me that a life without connection is just a slow way of dying. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Julian looked over at Sarah, and they shared a secret smile, a look that contained 10 years of battles, laughter, and an unbreakable bond. After the speeches were over, the family retreated to the penthouse garden, away from the flashbulbs and the noise. Aunt Martha was there, sitting in a rocking chair, watching the sunset over the sound. You did good, Julian, Martha said, her voice a bit raspy with age but still full of warmth. You took the broken pieces of your childhood, and you built a home for the whole world. I had good help, Julian replied, pulling Sarah into his side. Lily joined them, holding a small canvas. It was her latest painting, a simple, beautiful depiction of 3 people standing on a balcony, looking at a sunrise. The colors were warm and full of light. I'm calling it the morning after, Lily said, because no matter how dark the night gets, the morning always comes for us. As the stars began to twinkle over Seattle, Julian Thorne realized that his billions were finally put to their best use. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a husband, a father, and a survivor. He looked at Sarah, the woman who had once been invisible to him, and realized she was the brightest light in his universe. The story that had begun with a shattered door had ended with an open heart. He had spent a decade building a legacy, but as he stood there with his family, he knew that his true legacy wasn't in the tower behind him. It was in the hands he was holding and a love that would outlive them all. The architecture of his life was finally complete, built not of glass and steel, but hope and the enduring strength of the human spirit. If you liked the story, please subscribe our channel and hit the like button to watch more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.